Thank you.
Dick Flax here, co-president of SBCAN and convener of the monthly roundtable. And how we operate for people who haven't been here before is that very typically, and today's a good example of this, we invite to as presenters people who are, you might say, on the front line or cutting edge of policy issues in our region, in the county, and throughout the county, but particularly, usually we're a South Coast oriented roundtable, and there's a separate SBCAN North County. But today, roundtable today, we're doing a combined thing, which I think is quite appropriate. So what we do is have presenters, and if as you feel you have questions or things you want to be put into a Q&A framework, put them in the chat, and we try to moderate the chat. And then if we have opportunity, eventually in the conversation, we might open the floor without, to people who put things in the chat or whether or not they have. But let's use the chat rather than try to interrupt the presentation. Let the flow of the presentation go forward. And welcome to everybody who's just joined us. So I was reading, I guess it was in the Independent, long story about the State Street rabbit hole, you might say, that the city of Santa Barbara has been involved in. A lot of controversy and formations of various kinds, trying to figure out what the future of State Street would be. And what was very impactful about that coverage was the foregrounding of a group called Strong Towns role in the State Street discussion. And it impressed me and excited me because I hadn't really paid much attention or any attention to that a group, and they seem to be made up of a new generation of people who wanted to engage in helping talk about and shape the future of our community, and including people with some expertise and interest in planning and stuff like that. So we reached out to them to ask them to come to the round table and talk about what, first of all, Strong Towns is. It's a national network. And then, most particularly, to focus on the State Street story and their role in that and their vision on that. And as I told Sully, who's one of the founders of the group here and who'll, I guess, kick off, I said, one of our interests in SBCAN and a lot of the people around this space today is housing issues, and we want to see if we can get Strong Towns folks' perspective on that. And this is an opportunity for us to reach out to each other. I don't think the Strongtown folks have heard much about SBCAN, and I gather from some of what I've been reading, they don't really, not necessarily aware of a lot of the housing advocacy and activism that actually has been happening. So this is a good opportunity to inform them, but we want to get their perspective and their energy. And so Sullivan Israel, welcome. You want to introduce any of the other folks who might be chiming in?
Yeah, thanks for having us. Whoever else is from Stronghouse, I guess. I don't know who exactly decided to come. I know I can see Thomas and Linda. Is there anyone else?
So Ian's here.
Okay,
Yeah,
Ian also. All right, well, yeah, if you guys, so I can introduce myself and you guys can introduce myself just briefly. And then I put together a little slideshow, just like what Strong Towns is and what we've been doing. But I would love it if people put questions in the chat while I'm presenting and I can swivel to answer whatever goes on there. And hopefully that won't take too long and then we can have a discussion. But yes, we're going to focus on housing. I even have the Strong Towns housing book that just came out. Just, oh, it's being blurred out. But anyway, so yeah, my name's Sullivan. I'm 24. You can call me Sully for short. I just graduated with two masters, civil engineering and urban planning from Cal Poly SLO. And now I'm working professionally as a planner. not for the government of Santa Barbara. I've lived in Santa Barbara since I was 10 years old. Started Strong Towns a little bit less than 2 years ago. And just some very quick facts. We now have close to 400 people on our email list. Sort of if you sign up for our email list is what we consider a member. So for around 400 members. We have monthly meetings. We have anywhere between 15 to 35 people show up to our monthly meetings. I'm very proud to say that the group seems to be quite diverse in many ways, in age, in background, in career. And one of the things I like most about the group is that it's mostly not planners. It's mostly people who have lives outside of planning, but who were brought to the group by some concern, whether it is they want to see more affordable housing, they're from here, they feel like they can't afford to stay. We have a lot of people who come because of transportation, because Strong Towns focuses on everything urban planning. So a lot of people who want to see safer bike infrastructure, safer streets, people who want to see more mass transit. And so we all come together and talk about these things. But yes, thank you, Dick, for using the term network. Strong Towns is a network. It's not a strict, group where we're told what to say or anything like that. In fact, I've barely talked to the National Strong Towns people at all. It's just an opportunity to use the name of a popular urban planning book to represent the group so that people kind of know what our philosophy is coming into it. But it's not much more than that. So as a local group, we just set our own policy and chart our own course. So yeah, if you guys, I see Linda here. So Linda, would you like to introduce, I guess a lot of people know you, and then maybe Thomas and Ian also.
Yeah, I would just say that I'm new to the Strong Towns group. I've been to the last two meetings. And I'm impressed with everybody. It's a very welcoming group, and they're prepared to listen. They're prepared to hear all kinds of ideas. And I especially love the Discord group because it allows people like me to talk about things I'm interested in every day and don't have to worry about clogging somebody's email box. And I also get feedback from what I comment on as opposed to just having the one-way emails. So welcome.
I'm Thomas Sakula. I'm a local architect and designer in town. I studied traditional architecture and urbanism at Notre Dame. I was also part of the team that is working on the design for State Street and incorporating feedback from Strong Towns has been really our best route to getting community feedback. And so a lot of the feedback from Strong Towns, I think, helped inform what kind of decisions we made on State Street. I'm now working with the nonprofit Friends of State Street to try and look at how we might start implementing these ideas because it's still a long road ahead. I've also been studying affordable housing in the last month or so and looking at all sorts of new approaches or different approaches we might want to take to affordable housing. I think that if we want to truly get to affordable housing and make it happen, we have to look at architecture and urbanism in a different way. We need a system that can coexist with our current system, but I think that there's a lot of room for new ideas in that space.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly introduce myself. Hi, everybody. It's really great to join one of these. I'm Ian Bauke. I joined Strong Towns a couple years ago. Yeah, I grew up in Santa Barbara and I got the political bug and went to school in DC and kind of went back and forth for a while. I got connected to local activism through like more partisan democratic stuff. And I think it's really refreshing to see strong towns come about and have it's a diverse group, but there is a very good representation of younger Santa Barbarans pushing these issues now, which is really refreshing to see. Because for a while it felt like I was one of the only ones of my generation advocating for things like affordable housing. And one of the things that drives me a lot is transportation policy locally. And so making Santa Barbara truly a place that we aspire to be, where a car is an option to get around, but it's not required, right? So you have a fair and safe equitable choice, no matter where you live, to walk or bike or take public transportation. So that's part of the perspective I come from, and very, very passionate about keeping our downtown and State Street, true to its identity as the core Santa Barbara and like the value it has. But I think we've come to see that the absence of cars there is actually very much a value add, and so very excited for the long term future of State Street. And I heard recently that in April of next year, the draft master plan for State Street, the long term vision, might start circulating among the city's review boards, like the Planning Commission and historic landmarks and transportation committee. So keep an eye out for that if that's something you're passionate about. But yeah, thank you so much for inviting us along here.
So can you give us your name? Because I don't think it's up there, so can't.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's Ian Bauke. Yeah, I thought it might be
Great.
attached to my picture, but yeah, thank you.
All right, so yeah, those are just three of our many fantastic members. You can see the different backgrounds there, which I love. So I think I'll share my screen now, and I can make this slideshow full screen here. So yeah, like I said, I'm gonna go through this. Please say stuff in the chat, and then we can veer off. But in the meantime, I might as well introduce you to some of the stuff. And this is a slideshow I actually have used to talk about this group before. So just to get it out of the way, like what even is Strong Towns in the first place? So I mentioned Strong Towns is the name of a book. It was published about 10 years ago. And it's an economic book. It was published by a civil engineer, actually, Charles Marone. And he had no intention of starting groups like ours. He just wanted to write about all of the horrible decisions he saw cities making as a civil engineer, mainly financial decisions relating to overspending with infrastructure, and also how zoning had sort of restricted things so much that prices were severely affected. So he wrote this book, which was kind of an approach to urban planning seen through the lens of economics. And people liked it so much that they started groups where they would use his book and all the many studies and evidence-based arguments he makes to make these arguments. And so he then started the nonprofit. So actually the groups came first. Then he said, hey, this is so cool, and decided to kind of make it into his life, running his Strong Towns nonprofit. And then, like I said, anyone can sort of call them up, say, can we use your name? And they say, sure, as long as you don't veer too far away from the core of what Strong Towns is about. And these 4 bullet points on the screen is how the Strong Towns website describes what it's about. So what is the Strong Towns approach that's advocated for in the book? So the main thing is efficiency versus resilience, and also big bets versus little bets. So a great example he talks about are small businesses versus gigantic chain stores. He's from the Midwest, so a lot of communities there try and get these huge chain stores to come. They offer them a tax relief, and then what ends up happening is they close and go to the next town quite often, and the community is left with a giant bill for all the money they spent to accommodate that store. But whereas on the left here, you can see there's this town in Michigan which took an empty lot, which had been sitting on their main street for decades, and no one was developing it. And they put Costco sheds that cost about $6,000 each along this empty lot and rented them out for a nominal fee to small businesses. And a number of these small businesses, because the rent was so low, were able to get started and then actually eventually move into main storefronts, opening these Costco sheds to the next small group of businesses. So this is an example of like a small bet, something that cost very little for the city, but had this huge payoff versus, giant bets like huge new roadway projects or things like that. So the Strong Town approach is also about adaptation. A lot of cities these days are sort of overregulated. We're kind of experiencing this with State Street. It takes forever to get something done. A great example here I have on the screen are 2 different parks. The one on the left does not exist yet. It's a rendering. And it's something the city of Los Angeles wants to do. They have a few acres of empty land, and they are going to spend somewhere like $400 million to basically cover it in concrete. And they hired fancy architects to design this striking building. Versus on the right, you can see during COVID, there was sort of a chink in the armor of a lot of these strict, time-consuming processes. And some neighborhood volunteers came out, painted the street, put out tables and chairs, and it became a really enjoyable space for the community. And again, it cost like next to nothing. So that's an example of a small bet and adapting. And if this painted space works really well, okay, now let's then spend more money on more permanent solutions to it, rather than just jumping to some giant, huge project.
Mhm.
And yeah, so here's the example of the $400 million park in LA, which is just like vastly over-designed and also mostly concrete. It's across from City Hall, if you're wondering where it is. And again, it's just a rendering. But yeah, here's where it is. So another important thing, which does need to be broached, and this has to do with housing, is that we need to go back and look at how cities were built for most of human history, aka before there was zoning in place. And so Strong Towns talks about in his book, he talks about in his new book, Escaping the Housing Trap, the sort of zoning trap we've put ourselves into, where we design new neighborhoods all at once. They're all single family homes, and they are basically built and then placed in amber. So the expectation is if you live there, that the neighborhood is always going to look that way, that nothing will ever change. The weaknesses in this approach are pretty obvious, though. All the houses are built at the same time, so they all start to fall apart at the same time. All the roads, the same thing. They're all going to need maintenance around the same time. But what's actually interesting financially is that because they're not very dense, there's not that many taxpayers per road width in these communities. Those homes will actually never pay enough taxes to pay for the maintenance of the roads and utilities that serve them. And that's really worth repeating. So if you look at, in 20 years when the bill comes due to repave the streets, that bill will almost always be higher than the amount that those homes have actually paid in. So they're a drain on city resources. Whereas traditional urbanism, or basically what we did for thousands of years, is communities were allowed to slowly build themselves up based on what the local economic demand was, whether for new businesses or housing. And so the idea is that we need to go back to those things in many places and instances. And yeah, so here's another example of small bets, productivity. And this is a great firm called Urban 3 that Strong Towns has partnered with, where they actually look at the amount of taxes that lots pay in versus the amount that those lots cost the city to serve. And you can see in this city, which is in Washington, the vast majority of the city is single family homes, and those homes are a net drain on the economy. And it's the oldest parts of the city, which have more traditional urbanism, that are actually a net gain for the city. And that actually, when they service those lots are then making money for them back. And that's because of the traditional urbanism and the way that they were built. So yeah, these are just, I'm showing you a lot of memes that Strong Towns puts on Twitter because they're kind of funny. But yeah, the difference between a parking lot and a place, or why don't people go outside. So this has to do with the design of our streets. So another big focus of Strong Towns is street safety and how we've designed our streets to prioritize car throughput, which I can tell you as a transportation engineer, this is totally true. We've forgotten all priorities except how many cars can we move through a space in an hour. And this is to the great detriment of those spaces, because those spaces become so unpleasant to be in that no one wants to spend time there, not to mention incredibly dangerous for cyclists and pedestrians and pretty much anyone outside of a car. So yeah, going back to the value per acre, this is a great example of the Walmart versus the downtown in Asheville, North Carolina, which I know was just hit by a terrible hurricane. But yeah, this is in the original book. And so what's funny is cities will often say, oh, we're bringing in this big business. They're going to make us so much money in taxes. The thing is, these stores take up so much space that they actually make far less per acre than traditional downtowns do. And what's also interesting about traditional downtowns is that they're adaptable. When one storefront goes out of business, it can then become an office or another store. When Walmart goes out of business, it's so big that it can't really become anything else other than maybe another big box store. And you can see also jobs per acre is really interesting here. So yeah, I mentioned the suburban experiment. So here you can see sort of traditional homes that were built sort of before zoning clamped down on neighborhoods versus an unsustainable single family home development here. And so I think what's interesting, and Chuck talks about this in the Strong Towns book and also in the Housing Trap book, is for most of America's history, there was a reward to your neighborhood changing. Meaning you would move to a place maybe on the edge of a growing city like Chicago and buy or build a very cheap home on a cheap lot. And as the city expanded, you could then open up a business in your front yard because now there are more people living nearby. Or you could tear down your house and build a duplex or a 3-story triplex and live in one of the units and sell up and rent out the other two. And so there was sort of an expectation that your neighborhood would change and that you could gain from that. And what we've done now is we've basically punished people for wanting to change their neighborhoods. This is where you kind of get NIMBYs. Now people feel very threatened when their neighborhood is changed. And there's also an expectation that your neighborhood will always look the same, which is just very unsustainable. And so the final thing I want to talk about is in the slideshow at least is, so what is our sort of approach to housing? How are we applying these things locally? So the main approach that we are proposing and that Strong Towns proposes is that we have to deregulate zoning and look at all these different forms of housing that we haven't allowed to be built in a really long time. You've probably heard them referred to as missing middle, right? It's all the different types of housing between a single family home and a large apartment building. So duplexes, ADUs, triplexes, six flats, which apparently I didn't even know that term until recently. There's the 3-story apartment buildings that have 6 apartments in them. We need to sort of deregulate and increase our supply of housing, which can also offer a diversity of housing types, which will be at different housing price points. And this is not sort of a theoretical thing, like maybe this will work, let's find out. There are a few cities that have done this over the past few years. And so here you can see a graph on the right of 2 very similar cities with similar housing markets, Chapel Hill, Raleigh, and Durham. So Durham did a bunch of housing reforms where they allowed people to build ADUs, was one of the main ones, and also duplexes. So they basically got rid of single family zoning. And you can see they did that in 2021, and that housing prices have leveled off there versus the neighboring city, Raleigh. They did not do any of these reforms, and housing prices have continued to go up exponentially. And they have, like I said, almost the same housing market. And so another interesting point about this is the reason that the book is called Housing Trap is one of the traps that we put ourselves into is everyone wants their home to go up in value. And yet we're all talking about affordable housing and bringing the price down. This is like an inherent problem, which you can see, right? Like, why would you want to bring your price down if you own the home? And so what's great about things like ADUs or turning your house into a duplex is that you're able to raise the value of what is on your lot while providing more housing. So when you take your single family home and turn it into a duplex, there's value added to your land. So the price still goes up for you as the owner, but the cost to rent each one of those units is now lower than what it would have been to rent a single family home. And the same goes for ADUs. And so that's kind of like the sweet spot. Another great example is Minneapolis. They also did a bunch of housing reforms in 2021, and you can see that rents there have sort of flattened out compared to other Midwestern cities. So yeah, if you're interested more in this, this is the book, How to Escape the Housing Trap. It's really interesting. About half of it is just the history of all the different federal subsidies for mortgages and how we got to 2008, which is really fascinating. If you don't want to read a big book, it's not that big, but if you don't want to read a big book about it, there's a really well-produced video on the Strong Towns YouTube channel. It's only 20 minutes long, and it's very easily watchable, and it goes through much better than I just did all the interesting nuances and arguments and history that's explained in the book. So yeah, and then the last thing I can kind of share here is I'll come out of the slideshow and I'll go here. So I recently had an article published, and I'm waiting for this there it is. So this is the Strong Towns website. So I'll also point you towards this. The Strong Towns website serves as kind of like a newspaper. There's articles published every day, and they're published by mayors and city council members. They're published by urban planners. They're published by random people like me who I'll send in an article and they'll publish it if they think it's good. And so you can read about what's happening with housing and with street safety all across the country from all these different perspectives. And so it's great if you're into urban planning. And so they published one of my articles last week. Yeah, you see some of the interesting headlines here. So this is my article. And this was also published in the Santa Barbara Independent. And basically, I go through the history of how we limited housing back in the 80s and how basically that has completely backfired because no new units were built. And so all the prices went up basically, and lower class first were priced out, and now middle class people are being priced out. And basically, I was looking at the demand of how much housing we would need to build. And that's basically resulted in about 40,000 people a day commuting into the city of Santa Barbara because we failed to accommodate them with new housing. So yeah, let me see. I don't know if there were any questions in the chat.
Oh, well, let me jump in. And
Yeah.
as I told you, I like to be professorially directive during these things. So I just make one comment, with all due respect, that there's a lot that you're advocating that is already part of the dynamic in the city. We've done a lot of rezoning in the heart of Santa Barbara. The urbanism that you're called traditional really is a lot of what characterizes the older parts of the city. I live right down here on Garden Street, near Alameda, near Alice Keck Park, and we look a lot like what I think you're envisioning, which is all to the good. But I kind of feel like not today, but I'd be very glad to dialogue with you and other in the group about the history of some of what you're talking about, including the things you reference in your article. I've been very active in all of those things, and it would be great to kind of mesh the historical understandings with what you're talking about. I think that would be very creative. But I was hoping you'd talk specifically about the State Street process and
Oh
your,
yeah, I can.
yeah.
Sure. Oh, I almost fell over. I can also give a brief response to what you're saying. So I would say yes, we've done a bit of zoning reform, but by no means have we done enough. And the sign that we haven't done enough is that there's almost no construction. And the reason that there's no construction going on downtown is because housing projects don't pencil out. And I know this because I've talked to a bunch of local developers who have told me that they don't pencil out. And a lot of them even already own some of the land, on State Street or 2 blocks within that area. And so what makes no sense is, right, there's 40,000 people who commute in every day. So you can assume that there's at least that much demand, which means if you built a unit, there's no question it would be rented. We all know it's a hot housing market here. So you would make money if you built a unit. And yet there's not many units being built, which must mean that the price to entry is still too high. The price to build is still higher than what you would make. So a great example of a zoning reform that we could easily do tomorrow that has not been done is parking minimum zoning reform, which is one of the first pieces of the puzzle that actually Strong Towns, I get into a little more detail, but that Strong Towns advocates for is attack parking minimums first, because parking minimums actually make all sorts of housing projects not pencil out that otherwise would. Because to build a single covered parking space can cost around $60,000. And if you're on, let's say, 1/4 of an acre, which is not a unique size in downtown Santa Barbara, there's plenty of small lots. And you have to build 1 spot per unit or 1 spot per bedroom. Suddenly, half of your lot or 2 stories of your building has to be parking, has to be concrete. It's incredibly expensive. And then if you do manage to build that building, you then have to pass on the cost it took you to build those parking spots to your renters, whether or not they own a car. And so in a number of cities, starting in 2015, actually was the first city to get rid of parking minimums. By the way, they don't ban parking. They just say each developer, they can pick how much they want to spend on how many parking spots they want to build. And if they think no one's going to rent their apartment without spots, they'll still build them. But if they think they are building in a neighborhood where people can get around other ways, they won't build parking spots. And it's been an incredible way to see housing grow. So that's just one example. There's some other examples like height limits or setbacks or minimum unit sizes, all kinds of things that I think are still totally on the table. But parking minimums is one of the ones that comes to mind first. Although we do have the state parking, is worth mentioning. The state passed a thing called 2097, which means you can't have parking minimums within a half mile of a transit stop, and the Amtrak station counts as one of those. So part of our downtown technically doesn't anymore.
Right, and I'll just say that this is an example of what I was meaning, that the historical context would enrich your understanding of what goes on here, because there's real conflicts and power struggles that lie behind what you're talking about, and but let's not get bogged down on that, because that's stuff we can do going
Yeah,
not only today.
absolutely.
So let's talk about State Street, would you?
Yeah. So yeah, we gave a presentation on State Street on I think September 3rd. We've been, because of the time that the group started, State Street has become sort of the centerpiece, which is funny because I didn't even mention it in that presentation. But basically every monthly meeting we have, almost all of them have been taken over by talking about State Street, because that's the big thing on the table and the thing that keeps coming up. So just to state our viewpoint very clearly, we don't want cars on State Street at all, anywhere. That's closed. None of the closed part of it now. And I would say we also want the Granada block to be reclosed. I would say that's basically the consensus in the group. Another one of the main consensus points is that bikes should be allowed on the length of the corridor. Now, big asterisks there before you cringe. Everyone in the group also condemns and does not like the ridiculous e-bike behavior that some of the, especially younger people, are doing on State Street. However, we do not see that as a reason to ban bikes. we see that as an opportunity to figure out ways to control that behavior through what I call passive infrastructure. And so it's basically designing the street in a way where behaving like that, going really quickly or doing wheelies, basically is very difficult. And that can be done with different types of pavement, colors, having the bike lane weave instead of being perfectly straight, constraining the space. And so that's sort of our proposal. The logic there being, there are people who drunk drive, but we didn't ban driving because of them. So yeah, there are kids who are obnoxious on e-bikes. We shouldn't ban bikes because of them. We should figure out how to control the space. And the danger of not doing that, and this is something I mentioned a little bit in my presentation, the danger of not figuring out how to accommodate bikes is that we'll design a street and on paper it'll say no bikes allowed. But in reality, there needs to be a 20-foot wide clear zone for fire trucks. So no matter how we design the street, there will always be a 20-foot wide space where no tables and chairs are allowed, no planters, nothing, right? Clearly, that's going to be a space where people bike, and they're going to bike in ways that we don't like. And so it'll just continue being a problem. So instead, let's figure out, okay, maybe we pave this space with cobblestones. Maybe we put speed bumps, things that make it very uncomfortable to speed. And I showed a bunch of examples in my presentation of other cities that have done this. So again, I don't like speaking in theoreticals, and neither does Strong Towns. We really like fact-based arguments. And so I presented other cities that I've visited and where I filmed, what was going on there. And even where I had, even though I was on vacation, I called up a city planner and like met with him and talked to him about what they did in the Netherlands in a city. And yeah, they've sort of figured it out. A great example is the main street in Antwerp in Belgium, which is a spot that I visited. It's about as wide as State Street. Actually, it's like 80 feet wide. And basically they have sort of this bumpy kind of cobblestone style pavement, I would say 20 feet from the storefronts towards the street. Then they have rows of stuff. So they have trees, concrete benches, trash cans. Where there's restaurants, that's where the outdoor seating goes. So they have this just rows of infrastructure and bollards. In the middle of the street is paved with a slightly smoother pavement. It's a little bit darker. That's also for fire access. And so the whole street, everything works very well. And whenever there's a spot where pedestrians are supposed to cross, that's where the bumpy pavement is used again. And so rather than this, what I've heard some people say is, well, we need a policeman standing on every block. It's like, actually, you can replace a police officer with like a bench or bumpy cobblestones, and it kind of has the same effect. It slows people down just as much, right? And I observe the street for hours, and it works incredibly well. And there's way more cyclists there than we have even here because it's Europe. And so it's kind of ideas like that we were putting out there. And the other main part of our presentation, we had Thomas present. He presented on the sort of urbanism, traditional urbanism aspect of things, design, creating a sense of space, which was great. And then another Strong Towns member named Peter, who's not here, he presented on the economic side of it. Because again, Strong Towns is at its core, it's actually about economic resiliency, even underneath all the urban planning. And what we kind of wanted to get out of the way with Peter's presentation was basically saying like, all these arguments that State Street is a failure, that it's terrible, that cars are going to bring back economic resiliency have no basis in fact whatsoever. We led with the fact that the vacancy rate today is lower than it was in 2018. So we kind of want to put that to bed. Like, that's not worth talking about. Also, the fact that traditional, quote unquote, traditional shopping experiences are probably never coming back because of the internet. And so trying to harken back to a time where people drive up to a store and go and shop at a big box store for stuff is not happening. That's a national trend, right? And so the commercial areas that are doing best, and again, we looked at economic studies on this, are places that are experiential in some way other than just being a shopping district. If a place where you could drive up and shop was the solution, then La Cumbre Plaza would be thriving, right? And it's not, because it doesn't matter. You can park right in front of it. It sucks. And so you need places where people can bike and where there's interesting things outside and outdoor seating and who knows, maybe some kind of games and events. That's the kind of place that people are actually going to shop at. And so that's kind of like the future of our commercial centers in America. And also, of course, housing. You need people to live within walking distance of stores. So it's easier for them to shop there than it is for them to order something online. And that's a lot of what they have in Europe too. And the commercial areas in Europe are thriving, even though they have the internet there as well, obviously. And that's because they have enough people living nearby to actually shop in person. And I see a question in the chat. Yeah. So, okay, great point. The shuttle. We're also pro-transit on State Street. And we think all those things can work well together. Again, as long as we have to have this 20-foot wide clear zone for fire trucks. There's no reason some kind of shuttle can't use it. And I've heard this weird argument, which is, oh, well, if the shuttle's going to use it, cars might as well come back too. No, that doesn't make any sense. It's drivers like of private vehicles that generally injure or kill people in car accidents. And, you know, trained shuttle operators don't really do that often, especially at slow speeds. And another example I gave during my presentation of a space that's bikes, pedestrians, and actually light rail is in Jerusalem, where I was this past summer, and I filmed it, a bunch of it. And so, yeah, they have these actually giant light rail trains that come right down the middle of this pedestrianized street. And I filmed these videos. It's so fascinating. People are walking in the street, and you can see the light rail approaching from like a block away, and you slowly kind of just meander out of the way, and the cyclists kind of meander out of the way, and everything works very well. And there's no signage telling people what to do. It just kind of operates naturally. And that's because the light rail is only going like 15 or 20 miles per hour at max. And so it's kind of, I think what I've realized in urban planning, what a lot of urban planners are talking about is when you remove cars from the system, in other words, human error, that's what drivers kind of bring, everything kind of works very well. And that doesn't have to be on every street, but on a place like State Street where we're trying to create a sense of space, I think it's worth it.
So your perspective here, I think, reflects or is reflected in the general opinion of the wider community from all the measures that we have, and yet the mayor, Randy Rouse, has insisted on the need to bring the cars back. Where is he coming from? That's my first question to you. But also, so I'm curious how your members, your people, are playing an active inside the decision-making process. How are you relating to that, if you understand what I mean?
Yeah, and also Ian or Thomas, if you want to jump in on anything, just let me know if you can. So yeah, I am not in the mayor's head. I cannot, you know, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know what's going on with him. You know, when he was running, he said during his campaign that he would not want to open State Street to cars. He's flipped on that. I will say one thing though that's upsetting to me, and I'll be honest about it, is at a recent city council meeting, he called us out by name. He said Strong Towns by name, and he said, you know, they don't know what they're talking about. Basically, the gist. I'm not saying it verbatim, but one thing he said was, "I've yet to see anything other than feelings. I've yet to see a concrete argument with facts." And that's the part that's upsetting to me, because it's okay that he disagrees. Political discourse is fine. I mean, I wish he'd reach out to me and we could actually talk. But we've, for the past 2 years, sent in multi-page, I'm talking 20-page comment letters that are, every single paragraph has hyperlinks to studies from other cities, to economic studies, to other examples, to everything you can imagine. And our one of our main tenets as a group is we do not say an opinion unless we have facts from a peer-reviewed study or from another city to back up that opinion. And so when he called us out on that, that was what was upsetting. I was like, you could at least engage with the facts that we're sending you instead of just saying, I haven't seen any facts. So again, I don't know where he's coming from. You know, like I said, I haven't talked to him personally, and I really wish I had, and I wish I can at some point, but I just don't see that happening. The lucky part is, the good news I would say is, like what you said, most of the community in every single survey, 80% of the community seems to agree they don't want cars. How are we getting involved in helping that process? Well, we did our own survey, because I saw on Nextdoor, for instance, people saying, oh, that 80%, those are just people who took the survey. That doesn't represent the business owners. Okay, so Strong Towns volunteers went out and went up the street and surveyed business owners. So, and we avoided restaurants, because the big claim is restaurant owners love it, retailers don't. So we talked to retailers on every single block. We tried to get as big a sample size as possible, and we only talked to owners or managers. We didn't talk to employees. We found that 80% of the businesses we talked to said not only do they not want cars, but not having cars has been a huge economic boon to their business. And this went for retailers of all types, antique stores, modern clothing store, like you name it. And so that just also flies in the face of, like, you know, some of these arguments, which is why we did the survey. So we're trying to get involved in ways like that. We also did a survey of cyclists, because people say, oh, the cyclists there, you know, they're not spending any money. They're just cycling through. So this was a year ago now, over a year ago, but we stopped cyclists. We asked them a 5-question survey. One of the questions is, what are you doing here? And one of the answers was spending money. We found about 40% of them were spending money. And so, yeah, other than that, our main ways of getting involved have been writing public comment letters every time State Street comes up or anything comes up. We're constantly writing public comment letters. I'm really proud to say that because of Strong Towns, there have been, I can name at least a dozen, 2 dozen people who have given their very first public comment in person on Zoom or written in their lives because Strong Towns as a group gave them the confidence to do that. Because one of the things that we're facilitating isn't just what our opinions are, but it's actually just getting people involved in the first place. A lot of people are afraid to get involved. They don't know how. City council meetings are at 2 p.m. on Tuesday, which is absolutely awful. And so there's a kid as young as 17 and also a retired guy, and we've gotten them to give their first public comments, and we let them say their opinions, or we don't tell them what to say, but we, came to the group and sort of gained the confidence to do that. So I'm proud
Yeah,
of them too.
I gave my first public comment this week on council. I would say mainly from my involvement in Strong Towns, it's just kind of got me more involved in the community in like kind of a big way, and just trying to look at how we can solve different problems in town. And it's really an uplifting group, especially for younger people, and just kind of realizing that this is our community, and we we can work together and make things better for ourselves. And I think that because of the urbanism that we live in, I think it's hard to connect with people. I don't run into people I see people walking their dog on my street, but when I lived in Rome, I had met so many more people. I met friends on accident. That happened to me in Rome. That happened to me when I lived in Wales. I being like the urbanism can uplift the community in a lot of different ways. And I think that because we've spaced ourselves out with cars, it makes it difficult. Like I hadn't even heard of your group before, that this Action Network. And I think there's a lot of groups like Strong Towns in this group that it's where we have to do Zoom calls like this. Whereas, if we lived in Rome, we would just like see each other. Or if we, even in to get that urbanism in where I lived in a town in Wales, there's 2,000 people, and it's people like it's your own high school is the best way I can describe it. You know what's going on with everyone. And I think that what we're all seeking is kind of spaces where groups like us can kind of come together and have discussions in an easier way.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, Thomas's subjective experience has been proven. There's a great book, not related to Strong Towns at all. It's a completely different author called Happy City. It was UCSB's book of the year a year ago. I'll put the title of it in the chat.
He actually,
Yeah,
the author came
yeah,
to,
and the author came and gave a talk. And yeah, he talks about how, walk score, different aspects of a city totally affect your life in ways that you would not otherwise imagine. So people who live in more walkable places have more friends and they see them more often. And the highest rates of loneliness are in places that are car centric, because it's so much harder to see your friend and you have to organize it so far in advance because of traffic. But yeah, and all sorts of things around commuting. And one of my favorite facts I read in that book is if the length of your commute is correlated to how likely you are to get divorced. So people who have longer commutes are more likely to get divorced, which is weird because they're seeing less of their partner. So you'd think that would have the opposite effect. But no, seriously. And also, higher blood sugar, cholesterol, you name it. I mean, it's all bad for you. And so, yeah, it's totally true what Thomas is saying. And so, yeah, talking about housing in downtown, another great thing we did that I'm proud of is we partnered with a group called the Parking Reform Network, and they're a nonprofit whose sole and only focus is eliminating parking minimums. So they're a one singular focus group, and they do this really cool thing where they make maps of cities, but you have to kind of reach out to them first. And they'll look at the area of the city that's considered the downtown, which is the area zoned for the highest density. And they'll make a map of what percentage of that area is parking, off-street, right? Off-street parking. And so there's some horrendous examples, like I think Atlanta, Georgia, it's 80% parking downtown. But Santa Barbara, it's 27%. So 1/3 of our downtown is empty most of the time because city surveys have shown that even the busiest parking structure is never more than 60% full. And that's even on like a Sunday when everyone's out. And so we have all this space. So I would consider El Pueblo Viejo we have some of the most beautiful buildings in California there, which shouldn't be touched, by the way. But we also have a bunch of empty parking lots, which just provides an opportunity. So I like to think of our group as sort of a descendant walking in the footsteps of all of those who were involved before us, like Pearl Chase, and sort of finishing the project that she started. I don't think she, for instance, would have wanted a bunch of a 1/3 of downtown to be empty parking lots, which you can see from her drawings. So I think there's a ton of opportunity for more housing. Part of the problem is a lot of those lots are owned by the city, and so something will have to be worked out with them. They're not up for sale. But a lot of the areas that even are private, they're only 1 story tall, and that doesn't even count as parking, right? And I talked to one of the owners of a 1 story tall building on State Street, one of the biggest ones, and he said it doesn't pencil to put housing above here. It doesn't pencil because of the zoning requirements, the height limits, uh, staircase requirements. And so he already owns the building right there on State Street, and it has enough room on top of it to eat. I mean, it's huge. It's it's one of the markets there.
The fact
So
that
it's
the
like,
city owns the parking lots means that that housing could be more cheaply built there if it's
absolutely, yeah.
publicly subsidized. And that's something that we could get into, uh, that there needs to be, we have a great housing authority. I don't know how much you've looked at what they've accomplished here. And
Yeah.
I want to remind people that on the ballot in the city is a sales tax, small sales tax increase. A large portion of that revenue will be going into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This is what the Housing Authority needs to leverage uh, the kind of housing that they want to build. So uh, it's not that you need to figure out how to approach the city. If we could get a framework within which publicly owned land like parking lots could be used also for the development of housing, that would be the avenue for affordability, is or one of the avenues for affordability. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I'm just putting the parking reform network thing in here.
No.
Um, yes, it does present an opportunity. I've been in conversations with the city and particularly with some city staff who are in charge of parking policy. And here's the problem. As you know, there's a parking deficit right now, which, by the way, should be good news because fewer people are driving, which is good for the environment. And I think a lot more people are cycling. But anyway, I said to them, okay, why don't you pick your most underperforming lot and, see if you could do a public-private partnership or do something with the housing authority. And they said, we're too constrained. There's no avenue for that right now at whatsoever. And that's what they told me, the city staff. And they said part of the problem is we would actually lose money. So there's a reverse incentive structure to actually provide housing because they would lose money by converting a parking lot to housing, which is funny because a lot of studies show if you look at the economic utility, which is, how useful a thing is to the economy. If you look at the economic utility of 2 parking spots versus an apartment that takes up that same amount of space, which is like a 1-bedroom apartment, takes up the space of 2 parking spots in the aisle behind it. For businesses within a half mile, that permanent resident has a far higher economic utility than those 2 spots do. Because those 2 spots are empty at night, they're empty during the week. Whereas a resident who within a half mile is constantly buying things. So it's a much more guaranteed income source. So it would be great for the businesses downtown if the parking was turned into housing. In other words, that housing would more than replace the parking that it replaced. But apparently there's like a completely reverse incentive structure in the city to actually do that.
Yeah, I wouldn't rely on the city staff as your innovators there, and but but great. This is so. I'm glad you guys are thinking about the housing part of the development of State Street. That's where the future lies. Is that kind of integral, as you were saying before, a kind of mixed use or uh, diverse way of developing downtown, not as a primarily, uh, as you said, a shopping mall, but as a experiential and residential area as well. So that's
Right.
so just in terms of wrapping up the State Street piece, what is the process as you understand it for going forward in terms of where is this master plan going to come from? Who's going to present it? I mean, just tell us what you know about that, so that would be helpful.
Oh, I think
Yeah.
I could
Thomas,
probably,
I was gonna say,
yeah,
yeah.
I've been kind of working with Anthony Grumbine, who's the chair of the Historic Landmarks Committee. There, the city is still in conversation with the original contractor, MIG, in developing technical drawings and how they might still support the project. But I think that much of the direction that we got from the council on our last meeting was that the mayor wants to see results now, and I don't blame him. We've been discussing this for quite some time, and so the city is working right now on in impacting the street as soon as possible and implementing pilot projects to see how some of the decisions or what direction things might take. And so there's a number of pilot initiatives that are starting right now to start to see some changes on State Street, which I think is a really positive idea, because that's the best way, instead of drafting out the master plan in excruciating detail and then executing it. I think that rolling out ideas and seeing how the community responds is a much smarter approach. And I hope we can actually kind of continue if we have strong support with the pilot programs. I think that State Street's going to develop in the way we all want it to. And so that's what I would see coming in the near term future, is these pilot initiative programs.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and if I
Yeah.
can just jump in real quick on the longer term planning, Thomas is definitely right on like what they're trying to do within hopefully this year or within the next year on pilot projects on like different blocks, like they call them headlets, like sidewalk extenders. They talked about putting those in the 500 block, but the master plan is moving forward with a car-free configuration from Victoria Street to Haley Street as the boundaries of that. And they are going to do some improvements to the 1300 and 400 blocks, but they'll still have two-way traffic. But they're going to try to expand the sidewalks and things like that, which is better than nothing, right? So it's going to go kind of on a road show next year in the spring, is what they're saying, to different boards and commissions and to the community at large to get feedback from the community, which I think is definitely very encouraging. There is a lot of the discussion from some of the people who have been more skeptical of that mayor has been, how are we going to pay for all this? The city's capital improvement budget estimates maybe a 40 to 80 million dollar cost estimate for all of what's in the long-term master plan. And so folks out there, I believe Dennis Allen, former CEC board member, current, and Rob Fredericks, the Housing Authority, and folks with the Planning Commission have been talking to the city about exploring what's called an infrastructure finance district, where you take the incremental difference in assessed property tax value and you can funnel it directly into infrastructure, affordable housing, and implementing the long-term master plan. So there's a lot to come in the next year. And if you're interested in engaging on this topic, feel free to reach out to Solely and Strong Towns, and we can help you get connected and make sure your opinions are part of the process. Because nothing is set in stone yet.
Great.
Yeah, and there's one thing I want to add to that, and also because it looks like Gary asked a question about State Street that I should address. So yeah, nothing is set in stone yet, but I just want to reiterate based on Gary's question. So it's important to say that again, I'll say it, the vacancy rate today on State Street is lower than it was in 2018. That is not me. That's not my data. That's from the Hayes Commercial Group, which is the only one that compiles data on this stuff. And actually, the blocks with the lowest vacancy rates are those without cars on them. If you go up to the blocks that do have cars, like the Arlington block or the 400 block, there are vacant storefronts there as well. And the rate actually on those blocks is higher. New businesses, new restaurants have opened. There's a great new Indian place, actually, if you haven't tried it. On, I want to say the 1000 block. Yeah, it's on the 1000 block. And so another important thing to consider, though, is how much commercial space do we need and how much more than we had we built. And I bring that up because I read a really interesting fact. I think it was in Happy City. It might have been. In America, we have 3 times more commercial space per person than in Europe, and actually than in almost any other country. And that's because there's been an incentive for cities to permit commercial space because they bring in more taxes than residential spaces, which isn't the case in most places. And so we sort of have overbuilt commercial zones. And so no matter what we do, whether there's cars or bikes or transit or whatever, there might always be about 10 to 12% of storefronts that are empty because there's just too many storefronts. And so it's a question of where is that balancing point, and should, how much of that should be converted to housing to actually be sustainable. So it's an interesting thing to consider. I'll just put that out there.
There's one other comment I was going to make, which is that you often see in comments, wherever online and so forth, people saying State Street's a mess. It's dangerous down there. It's awful. It's ugly. It's deteriorated. I've been living in this town for 55 years, and all of that time, there's been voices like that. I don't believe there are a lot of people apparently who have opinions about State Street who never go there.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
that it's rife with homeless street people and so on, and that it's dangerous in that way. And that's sort of feeds into this, what Randy Rouse tends to reflect, which is we need to fix up State Street quickly because it's such a mess. Well, you're projecting I feel like you're projecting a different way of looking at it all. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, Dick, if I could, I just want to say, like, having grown up in Santa Barbara, my personal opinion is State Street post-COVID is much more vibrant and attractive as a destination for both local tourists than it was when it had cars on it. And, you bring up a lot of good points that I think people are going to make these complaints kind of no matter what, unfortunately. And the facts is, like, bringing cars back isn't going to solve any of those issues. I mean, the street is even designed in a way, it was intentionally redesigned in a way that very much limited even dropping people off on State Street. And it didn't really function very well as like a throughput traffic thing. Basically, it would just slowly go down. And if you wanted to park and shop, you had to go on Anacapa and Chapala anyway, just like you do now. So yeah, you bring a great point. Unfortunately, I got to hop off, but this has been a really awesome meeting, and I hope to join you guys in the future.
Great. Well,
Thanks,
I
Ian.
think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. If anyone wants to raise it, we want to raise any. I'm seeing a few things on chat. Thank you, Strong Towns. You're a breath of fresh air, says Spencer, and he's an expert on fresh air. No, I'm just joking. So Linda, maybe you want to make a comment, Linda. So you've been part of Strong Towns work in the recent weeks, and you have a strong housing advocacy role. So maybe Linda, you want to say something? Linda Hannepin, you there?
I think she's still on mute.
Oh, you're mute. Are you mute, Linda?
Muted, you unmuted me and then I muted again. Okay. There have been a lot of great ideas. Thank you for coming. There are things I hadn't thought about before. Generally, I'm interested in building coalitions and everybody working together and kind of knowing what other people are doing.
Right.
And along that line, I did put something in the chat about the CPA webinar that's week from Monday, right? Meryl can jump in because it features the new city administrator, Kelly McAdoo. And so far, I'm pretty impressed with her. We had a lot of dysfunction in the city. A lot of people left, a lot of planners left, which has been a problem. And I think that webinar would be a great opportunity to bring up the issue of why the city can't be using those parking lots. Because I know there's been a lot of interest with some of the council members about that. And certainly Rob Fredericks has said a lot about how that would be useful to him. So maybe you have some other ideas on questions to ask Kelly McAdoo. But anyway, I think I will put, unless Meryl wants to say something.
Well, yes, I invite everyone to that presentation. It is a week from Monday, the 4th at noon. Linda, do you have the flyer that you can post? Or what I can do
I
is
guess
get
I
it,
do. Let's see, I have the newsletter.
Well,
I can get it to Ken. I think Ken might have it too. But maybe get a list of the people who are attending today, and we can forward that to them.
I think we can even send it out more broad. Ken could send it out even more broadly because I think that sounds like a very
Right.
good,
Okay,
yeah,
And
great.
I'll just I'm going to put their website address in the chat too, so you
Okay.
got that. Okay.
Very good. All right. So, Sullivan, Israel,
Yes.
and the rest of the crew team, if you want to call it, from Strong Towns, we love having this connection with you, and I really actually am itching to talk to you further, just one on one, or I'd be willing to talk to whoever in your group about some of the history, including the limits of growth study that you're talking about and what went into all of that. There's a whole lot of history that I think you guys should know and what the different efforts have been. Uh, SBCAN was founded on a slogan we called the HOT program. Housing, open space, and transportation were our three integrated planning ideas. We've sort of moved away from that particular formulation, but not against it. That still underlies the history of SBCAN for 25 years now. Uh, so the whole idea of smart growth of or strong towns, or however you want to phrase it, has been a feature of what we've been trying to do all these years. But the energy and creativity and ideas that you've got really are refreshing, as Spencer says, fresh air.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I hope that we can build our relationship. As Linda said, we like to work very much in a coalition fashion with other groups. That's what's needed, and I think you guys need to know that there's a strong housing coalition that has moved in many of the same directions I think that you're talking about, but your ideas are very enriching, I think, to what we want to do. So so thanks a lot. You can hang out here, but we have a couple of other things on the agenda that we're very interested in, especially Colin from Local 770 of UFCW. You want to take it? And by the way, Colin, you put up there that in Ventura there's a similar Main Street controversy going on. So welcome, Colin.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dick. My name is Colin Messiker. I work with the FCW 770. I'm generally in the communications department, but I help with some community and political engagement for our northern areas. It's great to see you all, a lot of people I've seen before, and definitely appreciate all the work that SBCAN is doing. Dick and Ken and Nancy asked me to be here today to talk about the merger we've been facing between Kroger and Albertsons. Have most of you heard about that going on? Yeah. So
Go ahead.
this is a big problem. Kroger and Albertsons are essentially the two major grocery stores left nationwide. Vaughn's, Albertsons, it's all one banner. Kroger would be Ralph's, Food for Less locally, Foods Co. up north a little bit. And so if they merge, there's essentially one grocery store. And that would not only hurt our workers' ability to negotiate a good contract, but it would also hurt, the customers, because they'll have to close some of those grocery stores. They promise they're going to lower prices, but they will increase prices. And a lot of the stuff that's been coming out during the merger process and our opposition to it is they're promising to keep stores open, no jobs will be lost, prices will go down, but they won't put that in writing. They won't make that part of the deal. And as we dig into it, and as we go through litigation between the FTC and different groups that are opposing this merger too, it keeps coming out, well, we can only guarantee that we won't close stores in the first 6 months. We can only guarantee we'll try and make prices good. Like there's nothing like that they actually plan to do. So we've been fighting this merger since October of 2022. They announced the merger on the 13th of October. And we convened a group of locals that we've been working with together to oppose it like that day. And we were getting calls from members that were concerned that day because I don't know if a lot of you remember the Hagen merger back years ago, where Hagen bought up a bunch of the grocery stores that were Albertsons and Vons. And within 6 months, the company went under and those stores closed. And we see this as the same type of deal. And so we're really fighting to stop it. We've been working with the FTC. We've been testifying with them. They've sued to block the merger. Colorado, Oregon, and Denver attorneys general have sued to stop the merger, and those cases are going right now. We're expecting a lot of results from those cases to come out in the next week to next couple months. And the plurality of people are just against it. It only benefits the company. It only benefits the CEOs. It's not going to help the customers. It's not going to help the communities. It's a bad deal for everyone except investors. So we've really been working to fight against it. There's a great article that was in the Cincinnati Enquirer lately, which is kind of important because it's the paper that kind of these companies are focused around. It's like their local paper, and they did a really in-depth story on how this would affect workers directly. And they interviewed the workers and let them share their stories. So if you have a chance, it's a really good one to read through. There's several of our members in there, as well as members from some of the other locals we've been working with in Colorado, Washington State, over in Maryland. Like we put together this coalition. And I will acknowledge, like, when we put together the coalition of locals, we reached out to community partners, and SBCAN was one of the first ones to sign up and support us. So we really appreciate that too. It's been huge to show that it's not just the unions opposing it, it's the community and the customers as well. I don't want to keep going on too long because the merger is very important, but there is more information on nogrossymerger.com, which I'll put into the chat. And I encourage you to check that out. We have some updates, some of the news stories, and as things develop, we put more and more information on there. Like you all, we do have several things going on. So I wanted to talk about some of our contracts around CVS, Rite Aid, and upcoming grocery contracts. But before I move into that, did anyone have any specific questions about the merger?
I wanted to ask you, what's the final outcome? What kind of decision is necessary for either this up or down on this merger? Where does it, how does it culminate?
It's a little bit difficult. The FTC has had sued to block this. The judge could decide at any time. The attorneys general had sued, and most of those cases are wrapping up, and they could decide at any time. But it's like any other case. It could be appealed. The companies could pivot and try some new tact for how they're going to do this. So whatever happens, this is just the beginning of it. We have a lot of momentum and a lot of support to stop the merger from different angles, but the companies are going to keep trying to do it. So I wouldn't say there's an end game kind of in sight or any definitive like end point, but we're winning the current battle and we have to keep fighting the next battle too.
It looks like a lot rests on the outcome of the election.
The election for sure. The main reason we've been able to have any kind of footing with the FTC is the leadership of Lena Khan. She's been taking on monopolies left and right. The last monopoly that really got broken up was probably Ma Bell, like, decades ago. And they've just been letting companies merge and come together and get bigger and bigger. And it's the consumers and community that end up suffering because you don't have any choice and prices go up and you don't have anywhere else to go. You just have whatever is left behind. So if Trump is elected, Lena Khan will be gone. There'll be a Trump appointee in there, and business will be just thrilled and just tear into us.
So and even if Kamala is elected, there's no guarantee that Khan will be protected there. But at least her rhetoric, Kamala's rhetoric about price gouging, points in the Lena Khan direction. I don't know if anyone's aware of what we're talking about when we mention the Federal Trade Commission and con, but this has been one of the main progressive accomplishments in the Biden administration has been that leadership and that role, right? Am I speaking the right line here?
I would say so. I mean, I think there's been lots of great accomplishments under Biden, but the FTC really fighting this hard to protect consumers is huge. When they came in and talked to us, they weren't only interested in testimony about how the merger would affect customers as far as like price gouging and the increase in cost, but they wanted to know how it would affect grocery workers' bargaining power. When we're bargaining against several grocery stores, we can kind of pit them against each other to get a better deal and increased wages. When we're negotiating with one store, it really limits our power at the bargaining table because they just have full control over parts of how the bargaining goes.
Right. So you were starting to talk about the CVS and pharmacy
Yeah.
drugstore story. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we've been working on CVS and Rite Aid negotiations for the last several months. We've been negotiating for about 6 months, and their contracts expired about 4 months ago. And I don't know if you saw in the news, but we did do a strike at CVS for 3 days. It was a targeted strike. Every member in those stores walked out. No one crossed the line. We had a lot of customer support, a lot of media coverage. And after months and months of negotiations, we went back to negotiations after the strike. Strike ended on Monday. We went back on Wednesday, negotiated till 3 a.m. on Thursday, and we were able to get a contract.
Mhm.
So we have a tentative agreement for CVS. The members are going to be voting on it in the next week or two. And if they approve, we're going to get one of the best deals, of probably the best deal we've ever had for CVS. And we were able to do that by building power in the store. We had members at the bargaining table that were talking to the company, telling them what they were fighting for, telling them the challenges they were facing as far as limited staffing and having to deal with violence in the workplace and all the troubles they were facing. And we're working to improve all of those conditions. And it was really the workers' power that made that possible. We've been in a similar boat with Rite Aid, and we've taken a strike authorization vote with them too. And we go back to negotiations on the November 6th and 7th. And if we don't get a good contract from them, we will be walking out again and going on strike because that seems to be the only thing these companies listen to is the members, using their power to work together to get these good contracts. And it's so frustrating, all the profits that the companies make and how much they cry poverty, and they find money to spend on everything else but the workers. And we're really working to take that back, and the workers are really standing up for themselves.
So the CVS contract applies across the whole chain, not just the stores that were on strike. Is that it?
It's across the whole, well, not the whole chain. It goes to more than the stores that were on strike. The contract, we work with the other locals in Southern California. So the CVS contract will go from San Diego up to Paso Robles.
Uh-huh.
And there's 7 UFCW locals that are part of that. And similarly with Rite Aid.
Well, that's very good to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, we SBCAN looks at 770 as a kind of part of the family, literally, because some of the top leadership of 770 have been Santa Barbara oriented people in reality, including Kathy Finn was a UCSB alumna, and she's the current president of 770. So I don't know about, and you're here in our region anyway.
Yeah.
And so are quite a few other people. So we're always feeling very responsible to listen to the needs you guys have and try to give whatever community support that we can help.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And it's similar to us. I mean, we do have quite a few people on staff that are former gauchos or lived in Santa Barbara at one point or another. And I live in Oxnard. I go up to Santa Barbara quite a bit.
Uh-huh.
And it's a small community, similar like what Sully was saying previously is a lot of our members can't afford to live in Santa Barbara. They have to live outside and commute. And we need to fix that. Like, people should be able to live where they work, and it really is better for everyone. We'd all like less traffic on the 101. We all want less pollution, and having people live where they work solves a lot of that. So that'd be big.
Great. And by the way, I wanted to welcome, in particular, Carmen Rhodes is here. Are you here, Carmen? Just to mention that Carmen is the director of the new Labor Center at UCSB. Very glad that you are joined us today. And I don't know if you have anything you want to add or say, just to say hi. We met you in a previous roundtable. Thanks. Anyway, Ken Hoff, our esteemed director, has a couple of items to inform us about, so take it.
Hey, thank you. And I'll be brief because we're getting close on time, but you probably all remember that 9 years ago, there was a huge oil spill on the Gaviota coast. And that pipeline hasn't started up since. Those platforms, 3 platforms, have been idle. But now ExxonMobil has sold the pipelines and the platforms to a company called Sable, which is a kind of a brand new company that nobody knows all that much about, and they're not well capitalized, and they want to restart the pipeline. And there's about 8 agencies that have to give some sort of thumbs up, or hopefully they'll give thumbs down, and that it won't restart because it's a dangerous pipeline. Some repairs have been done, but there's no way it can that it won't be a major danger if it restarts. So one thing that has to happen, then the first one that's got to happen is October 30th, our county planning commission is holding a hearing, and the county needs to approve the transfer of permits from Exxon to Sable. So we're urging the planning commission to not approve the transfer of those permits. But that's the first step. There's other important steps to come with the state fire marshal. That might be the most important one, and with the coastal commission. But right now it's October 30th, the hearing at the planning commission. And we are represented by the Environmental Defense Center on this issue, and they have put out an action alert, and we're going to boost that a little later this afternoon. So I don't need to belabor it now. If you're interested in this topic and you want to help us stop this restart of that pipeline, look at the action alert that we send out probably by close of business today, and plan to come to the October 30th Planning Commission hearing. It's in Santa Barbara, and the talking points are in here.
Okay. And what is this item about the Nature Museum?
I don't think we, Nancy, we didn't get the speaker on that we were hoping to.
Okay, all right.
Maybe.
So one final SBCAN announcement. We're having a fundraiser November 22nd. We're honoring what we call rising creative leadership in our community, honoring Monique Limon, Gabe Escobedo, and blanking on the name of the other leader. So Nancy, you want to boost that and remind people that they need to come to that and tell us about it. Go ahead.
I just sent the link in the chat so you can check it out. But the third honoree is Miss E. Anya Brown. She's the president of the Martin Luther King Committee here in Santa Barbara.
Thank you. Sorry for the senior moment. Go ahead.
So I'm just showing you the graphic of the 3 honorees.
Okay.
And go ahead. I didn't mean to. Did you want to say something else about that, Nancy?
Well, it'll be at the UCSB Faculty Club, and it's going to be like a reception style event. We're really looking forward to it. There's going to be great music, and we have some great sponsors already. So if you could join, that would be lovely.
go to the SBCAN website, right? And sign up.
Yep.
All right, any other announcements? So I hope everyone has voted or will be voting. And if you live in the city, I'm plugging the sales tax Measure I, which is needed for a lot of reasons, including, most importantly, providing a steady stream of revenue for the Housing Trust Fund for social housing in our community, affordable housing in our community. There's Measure P, the City College measure also needs support. There's a lot of controversy about it, as you might expect any tax measure. I'm not advocating for any candidate, but you know, I'm sure you know who to vote for, where you are. And vote often, please. I don't know, I didn't. Just kidding. All right, so any other announcements? If not, I want to thank everybody for being here. As usual, I learned a lot, and I hope you did too, and a lot of food for thought. So let's all carry on our work in whatever good spirit we can muster, and I hope things will turn out reasonably okay, folks, with our efforts. Take care.
Thank
Right.
you.